All right, this is the 2-3 video. So if you're watching this, you should be following along, taking notes in your workbook on pages 40 and 41. This is also shown on pages 69 through 71 in your textbook. And today I'm actually going to include some screenshots from those pages in the textbook so you can get a chance to kind of see what that looks like, see if that resource is helpful for you. So if you want to pause the video at those screenshots and kind of read through what's there, maybe you can make some additional notes in your workbook that might be helpful. Maybe you could just read through to try and build a better understanding. But today our goal is to write and graph linear equations. Again, same goal as all the videos in this unit, but now in standard form. So looking back at our vocab, standard form is ax plus by equals c. And so the first example says to sketch the graph of 4x plus 5y equals 10. So again, our standard form, ax plus by equals c. So 4 is a, 5 is b, and 10 is c. But we're actually not going to use those numbers for anything specifically on our graph. Instead, if you look at the notes, we have 2 steps for graphing in standard form. Just like every other form, we have 2 steps because we want 2 points. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to find the x and the y intercept. So we're going to do that by step 1, plugging in 0 for x in the equation and solving to find the y-intercept, and then plugging in 0 for y in the equation to get the x-intercept. So those are my 2 steps. So I'm going to set up my graph. I have my y-axis down the middle and my x-axis across. And so I'm going to do those 2 steps. What's that going to look like? So step number 1, they said plug in 0 for x in my equation. So what is my equation again? I have 4 times x plus 5 times y equals 10. And so when I plug in a number, I'm substituting that variable. So in step number 1, it's x for the number that they said. So 0 in for x. So I'll rewrite my equation, but now replace x with the number 0. So instead of 4 times x, I'm going to do 4 times 0 plus 5 times y equals 10. And so now if I solve for y, that'll tell me a point on my line. When x is 0, y is blank. So let's see what y is. Let's solve for y. So 4 times 0, that is 0, plus 5y equals 10. That's actually going to be pretty easy because 0 plus 5y is just 5y. So really I didn't even have to do all those steps. Plugging in that 0 for x just eliminates that entire term because 0 times anything is 0, right? So I could have just kind of eliminated that whole term. So now I'm going to solve for y. Remember 5y means 5 times y. So if I'm going to get y by itself, I have to do the opposite of times 5 and divide by 5. I'm going to do that to both sides to keep my sides equal. And 5 divided by 5 is 1. So they eliminate, and I get 1y equals 10 divided by 5, which is 2. So that's telling me that when x is 0, y is equal to 2. So I should have a point at x equals 2, x equals 0, y equals 2. So that would be 0, comma 2, right? X, comma, y. So that means I go over 0 on the x-axis and up to 2 on the y-axis. So that point would be right here. Again, it should be my y-intercept. Nice. So I'm going to do the same thing again. Step 2, maybe I'll write down here. But now instead of substituting in 0 for x, I'm going to substitute in 0 for y and solve to get my x-intercept. So again, what's my equation? 4 times x plus 5 times y equals 10. So I'm going to replace y with 0. And so I'll have 4 times x plus 5 times 0 equals 10. And so that term is going to be eliminated, right? 5 times 0 is 0. So I'll just have 4 times x equals 10. So to get rid of the 4, I'll divide both sides by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1x. And then 10 over 4, I could leave that as a fraction, but since I'm graphing, I actually want to make it a decimal. So then I kind of know where along my number line I'm going to place x. So 10 divided by 4 in my calculator is 2.5. And so that means there's a point when x is 2.5, y is 0, right? Because we made y 0. So that means there's a point at 2.5 for x, comma 0 for y. So let's place that point. So I'm going to go over 2.5 on the x-axis, right? So 1, 2.5 between 2 and 3, and up 0 on the y-axis. So that is my x-intercept. Now that I have the y-intercept and the x-intercept, that's enough to connect my 2 points and draw a straight line through the entire graph with arrows on both sides. And I am all done graphing. So again, if you want to see another example of the same thing, here's the screenshot from the textbook. I think that's super useful. So go ahead and pause the video and read through that. Ask questions in class. Otherwise, we're going to move on to number 2, which is just going to help us understand this form a little bit more. It shows 2 equivalent equations. So these 2 equations are the same. They're just organized differently, right? If I solved the equation on the left, I would get the equation on the right. So it says I have my slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b, and my standard form. Which one would I use to find the x-intercept? Explain. Which one would I rather use? Let's see, how hard is it to find the x-intercept with both of them, right? So here I have 2 equal equations. And in my notes, remember, what is the x-intercept? The x-intercept is where y is 0. So kind of what we just did, we're going to plug in 0 for y. So the equation on the left, if I substitute in 0 for y, I would get 25x plus 10 times 0 equals 150. And if I was going to substitute in 0 for y on the right, I would have 0 instead of y equals negative 2.5x plus 15. So for both of them, let's solve for x and see what we get for my x-intercept. On the left, we already talked about how easy it is with the 0. That's just going to kind of be eliminated from my equation, and I'll be left with 25x equals 150. To solve for x, I would divide both sides by 25 to get x by itself. And I would get 1x equals 150 divided by 25 is 6. So I have a point at 6, 0. That was pretty easy. On the right, I am going to want to get x by itself. So I do have like a 2-step equation here. So a long line through the equal sign. Opposite of plus 15 is minus 15. So let's eliminate that. 0 minus 15 is negative 15 equals negative 2.5 times x. So divide by negative 2.5. On both sides, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. 15 divided by 2.5 is also 6, as it should be, right? Because they're the same equation. And so, again, I have a point at 6, 0. I don't know. I think both of them are pretty easy. I think you guys could do it either way. I mean, the standard form was maybe one less step. So I guess we should pick standard form. Right? And so y, it took less steps. And so that's kind of the beauty of my standard form. Plugging in that 0 helps me solve it really quickly. And so what happens if I have something in standard form where I can't really plug in x or y, right? So look at these. For A, I want to graph 3y equals negative 18. So maybe if that was in standard form, that would kind of be like where like 0 is A. So 0x plus 3y equals negative 18. That would be the same thing as just 3y equals negative 18, right? Because 0 times x will always be 0, because 0 times any number is 0. So if I plugged in a number for x for that and solved for y, I'm solving for y, right? So if I do that, I would divide both sides by 3, and I'll get y equals negative 6. So if I plugged in x, which I don't even see x, right? So that means no matter what number I was trying to plug in for x, I would always get y equals -6. So this is kind of a special case. So what would it look like for any number for x? I would keep getting, like if 0 was x, I would get -6 for y. If 1 was x, I would get -6 for y. If 100 was x, I would get -6 for y, right? Because I don't even have an x. So I could keep plugging those numbers in. What it's telling, the relationship is in the equation. Y is -6. That means y equals -6 always. So let's see what that would look like as a graph. Let's set up my graph. I have my y-axis. And so I want to make sure that y equals -6 will be on here. So maybe I'll put my x-axis a little bit higher up, because I want to make sure -6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is -6 is on there, right? Because that's 0. So that means I'll have 0, -6, 1, -6, 2, -6. So I'll have a long line actually at -6 going on forever. So no matter what x is, y is -6. And I'll have the same thing for b, right? So I have 4x equals 12. So what does that mean x is? Divide both sides by 4. I get x equals 3. So again, that means x is 3 no matter what we try to plug in for y, because y isn't even in this equation. So x is 3 when y is 0. X is 3 when y is 1. X is 3 when y is 1,000, no matter what. So if I graph this, I have my y-axis. I have my x-axis. I think x equals 3 will be visible on there. And so at x is 3, 1, 2, 3, I will have a point at 3, 0, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 1,000, way off the graph, right? So I'll have a long vertical line at x equals 3. So when my equation is just x equals 3, that means x equals 3 always. So I could imagine it as standard form. It really shouldn't change. So those are two kind of special cases. Again, I have screenshots from the textbook of both of those situations. So what would it look like if it's y equals, it's a horizontal line. Why does it look like that? And then what would it look like if it was x equals a number? It would be a vertical line. What does that look like? So you could pause the video at these two screenshots and kind of read through that. Otherwise, we're on to our last question, which is number 4, a word problem. So what does it say? Almonds cost $10 per pound. Cashews cost $12 per pound. So we have this equation, 10x plus 12y equals 30. And so that's supposed to represent somebody named Tamira is spending $30 on a mix of X pounds of almonds and Y pounds of cashews. So before I read the question, because I see it says how, right, let's break down this equation just a little bit. So I wrote my equation down here. Again, reminding you that 10x means 10 times x, and 12y means 12 times y, and that's supposed to be equal to 30. Y, they already said it was equal to 30 because 30 was kind of her budget. And then they said X pounds of almonds. So that's how much almonds, how many pounds of almonds she's buying. And Y is how many pounds of cashews she's buying. So $10 for every pound of almonds, $12 for every pound of cashews. So as we read on, the question says, how does the equation change if she wanted to spend $40 on almonds and cashews instead? How many pounds of nuts could she buy if she wanted the amount of almonds and cashews to be the same, right? She wants the same amount of almonds and cashews. So she wants those two amounts to be equal. Well, first of all, how will the equation change if we change our budget? That's pretty easy, right? It would just be now 10x plus 12y equals 40 instead of 30. And so if I wanted to find when they might be the same, it would be really easy to graph it. If I had a graph here, I would set up X is almonds, right? So I would put my almonds on the X axis. That's what X and Y represent, my graph. And cashews on the Y axis. And I would do just like we did in those examples. I would find my y-intercept, right? When I buy the option to buy all cashews and no almonds. And then my x-intercept, the option to buy all almonds and no cashews. And then my line connecting these two is going to be representing all of the combinations in between, right? Of different amounts of cashews and almonds. And I could just look with my eyes to find the middle point would be a similar amount of cashews as almonds. And so if I wanted to do this without a graph, what they're saying is that Tamira wants X and Y to be the same, right? She wants X to be equal to Y. So let's say X and Y are equal. What does that let me do in my equation? In my equation, that means then I can substitute in X and Y for Y and X because we're saying those two things should be equal. So let's instead, again, plugging in values for other values, let's plug in X for Y. Because we said those two things should be like replaceable, because we're saying they're equal. So what would happen if I did that in my equation? I would have 10X. And now I'm going to replace Y. I'm going to put it for X, right? So 12X equals 40, right? If they're so-called equal, I should be able to do that. Then I have 10X plus 12X together. That is 22X. And I can solve for X. So now I'm kind of dividing up my budget just evenly, which should make my X and Y equal. So divide both sides by 22. And I get X equals, a crazy decimal, 1.81818. So let me round it to just X equals 1.8. So if I bought 1.8 pounds of almonds, I should be able to buy 1.8 pounds of cashews. About a similar amount for each. So I should be able to do 1.8 pounds of each. So that's kind of what we'll get into in this next unit is like how now can I have more than one relationship happening at a time. I know my equation for the budget, but also I know X equals Y. So that's kind of an interesting word problem. Otherwise, we're done for this video, but here's another screenshot from the textbook. You can kind of look over another overview of what is a standard form. After this, go back to your checklist, update, right? We finished the video. So now you're doing the do you understand and the do you know how. So be checking your work for that on Savvas, but be writing in your workbook on page 42. So page 42 should be full of notes and thoughts, right? Okay. Good luck.